Just waiting for the old stream to come on. It's saying that green light is slowly appearing. But yes, hello. Hello and welcome to another live stream from How to Code Well. My name is Peter Fisher, and today we're going to be talking about creating websites in 2018 and how difficult it is compared to the years before. Now, before I get started, I just want to apologize. I have a bit of a cold, so I'll probably sound a little bit throaty. Hopefully I won't go off into any kind of coughing fit throughout this live stream. Now, I'm a web developer. I'm a freelance web developer. I've been a web developer ever since school, right? And I'm now in my mid-30s, so I've been a web developer for quite some time. And becoming a web developer back in those days was so much easier than it was now, I believe. And I want to talk through a couple of pointers as to why I think that is true, and also make some discussion as to what we could do in the future to make web development more accessible to various people, and how we are losing out on some of the creativity that the previous years allowed us to have, because the barrier of entry was so low back then compared to what it is today. Now, before I get into any of that, I just want to give you a little bit of a roundup as to what I was getting up to as a freelance developer this week and last week too, because last week we did a live stream on, it was a coding tutorial. It was the first ES6 JavaScript coding tutorial. And as I mentioned last time, we're going to be doing that every other week. So next week, we've got another JavaScript live tutorial that I'm going to be doing on variable scopes in ES6. So if you are a front-end developer, a JavaScript developer, then do subscribe if you haven't done so. But this week has been pretty much bulked down in JavaScript, bulked down in CSS, a lot of adjustments, small little tweaks in here and there, lots of unit tests on the back end, so lots of acceptance tests and unit tests around various different projects, various different API endpoints, various different checks to ensure that the requirements of certain projects have been met. Lots of meetings too, and the last week there was a lot of work on updating front ends to look like a design that a designer has given me. So there's been a lot of that kind of like nickledy-piggledy moving little things here and there just to make the website look like the requirements that have been supplied. So there has been a lot of that kind of bitty work, if you know what I mean. Again, also an enormous amount of admin too. It seems like the closer we get to this point of the year, there is more and more administration in terms of getting stuff done for the tax kind of stuff, which you just have to do when you're a freelancer. But anyway, let's start talking about this whole thing about why I think creating websites is not easy in 2018 as compared to what it was perhaps in the early 2000s. The web has moved and progressed a huge amounts since then, and you could probably put a lot of this down to that, in the fact that now we are dealing with larger requirements and larger expectations. The expectation of the internet back in 2000 was nowhere near as what it is now. When you say to someone that you're going to be developing a website, for them now, there is a lot of expectations that website needs to address. For instance, it needs to be secure, it needs to be mobile, it needs to have the ability to work on multiple devices. Back in the early 2000s, it was just a desktop or a laptop. There was no mobile first kind of attitude. We never even thought that we could have websites running as they are today on a mobile phone. So there has been different technological advances, and that has made web development more difficult and more challenging. And it certainly has made my life more interesting, as these things come through. A lot of these new technical requirements means that I have to develop websites with all sorts of different things in the back of my mind that I have to be completely thinking about. But let's just compare just creating a simple website back in 2000 to what it is in 2018. Now, I have a couple of notes here that I'm just going to go through. And I did mention a lot of this over Twitter the other day. So if you're not following me on Twitter, then do check that out. That's at How to Code Well. So creating a website is no longer a simple and perhaps a fun task. When I built my websites, it was in the early days, it was because I wanted to explore and I wanted an outlet for my creativity in both the graphic department and just basically trying to, I saw web development as a big puzzle, and I was discovering the puzzle pieces. It's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. You don't know all of the bits until you look at all of the bits and you start piecing them together. And that's kind of like how I felt. But those pieces were defined in the box of the jigsaw, and you had that creative freedom. You didn't have to put all the pieces in the same place. They didn't have to make a beautiful piece of art. You could learn your skill through trying different things out in comfortable little environments. And so one environment that I used a lot was AOL Press. Excuse me. And AOL Press, for those that don't know, because I don't think it even exists anymore, it was a tool that America Online, the AOL ISP, would give you and give everybody who had their internet provided by them to create a website. And it was basically like an online text editor, essentially. And you could put all sorts of different HTML in. And also ISPs at that point, they gave a portion of their own storage space, and some even gave a domain. So you had off the bat the tools to create a website. The barrier of entry was extremely low. This wasn't just the same for AOL, this was the same for all different ISPs, where not only do they give you the broadband, but they also give you a designated piece of space that you can use to build websites. And so I used AOL Press as a means of exploring building web development. I wasn't even considering web development as the thing that I would do, like as a full-time thing, as a career. This was just something that I wanted to use to explore and create. And so what I was doing was I was posting up photos of basically like an online journal, essentially, an online diary. So photos of me and friends, excuse me, and also just a little bio, little talk about what was in those photos. And throughout that, I learned, how to upload images, how to use different offline tools to alter the image, and how to use the markup for HTML to write paragraphs, and how to link pages from one to the other. I found that all very fascinating and interesting. And like I said, it was like a jigsaw puzzle. You had all the pieces there. You had your images, and you had your href, your links, you had your paragraphs, and you were just slotting things together, and you were making a beautiful, in your opinion, website with those tools. And you had no need to learn any kind of advanced stuff in order to get something on the web very, very quickly and very easily. And also, not only did the ISPs provide you with that kind of level of creative freedom, but also social media back in those days allowed you to explore and put a profile, a basic web page about yourself, and allowed you the freedom to configure that through markup. And it's something that the likes of Twitter and Facebook, even YouTube here, just wouldn't even consider doing, allowing their users to create web pages, because essentially that is all a Facebook profile page is. It's a web page, but allow the user to actually alter the look and feel of that without any kind of boundaries. So you could alter the HTML of the MySpace, of the AOL Press, of those kind of profile type social media bits. And you could be very creative. It opened the doors to so many different things, and you could explore web development through that. So you ended up with a lot of front end people who were extremely creative, trying these things. And of course, when you're dealing with things like MySpace, you want to make your MySpace page look really nice. And so you had that incentive to learn HTML and markup. You had that incentive to show off your profile because it was all about you, right? Now, when you access social media, you have to do it through a very confined set of, basically a confined container. And it's the same with anything where you are having to upload sort of like profile pictures. You're conforming to their standards. You're conforming to their requirements. You're not saying that you're not allowed to put your profile picture to the right or to the left of you. You're not allowed to have links to various bits and pieces, or you're not allowed to alter the paragraphs. You know, it's very constrained. It's very tightly coupled to what they want to do, and it's very corporate. It's very clinical. And I personally think it's very sad that we have lost the creative freedom of the web to these big companies, Facebook, Twitter, and so forth, who define how your personal digital self should look. And through losing that, we've lost the element of creating a web page for the very first time with zero barrier of entry. I mean, you just have to sign up, right? Now it's slightly different. I mean, putting the social media aside, when developing a website, yes, I agree that you could just use Notepad and a browser, but to be to even consider being a full-time front-end developer, there are so many considerations that one has to accept and think about, more so than say back in the 2000s. And one is that whether you like it or not, a front-end developer needs to learn the command line. And that might sound, I mean, in my head, it sounds silly. Front-end developers need to learn the command line, but that is the reality that we're living in. Because if you are serious about web development, then you need to know how to install the dependencies that your application may require. Now, before any of those dependencies were even thought of, you would install scripts through an external link in HTML. And yes, you can do that now, but really what the market and what all the other web developers are doing is using things like NPM, package managers to manage packages. And yes, that gives an element of convenience. I agree, but it also bolts on a level of high complexity, because you're not now requiring front end developers to learn the command line, and that can be quite daunting when someone just simply wants to install something, or link to an external package. And I do think that in itself is something that turns people off when it comes to web development. They don't want to learn the command line. They just want to build websites. Imagine, if you will, that you were learning sort of print design, and you discovered that you needed to learn the operating system of whatever it is that you were designing upon. You don't need to do that. That's insane. But we are now constraining front end developers to use the command line. I mean, just look at all of the excuse me. Just look at all of the installation guides for the packages. It is all about using the command line. It is all about running commands on the command line to install a certain thing. And it is a nightmare when you're having to uninstall things, or there is dependency mess, or there is a conflict somewhere. So it is, and there is a huge risk of destroying one's system when deleting the node modules folder through the command line. So we are completely and utterly giving front end developers who are learning front end stuff for the very first time an extremely complicated task. So creative and open spaces that bred developers and designers are now lost to history. So that is the creativity is now boxed into a defined social container, such as Facebook or Twitter. These have replaced the MySpaces of the world. It's a bit sad, I think. And also the default requirements when building a website from the start are huge compared to what they were before. So you want a HTML form? Well, you're going to need to have HTTPS on that. You're going to have to secure that. You're going to have to encrypt that data coming through, which is a good thing, sure. But again, that's just another thing that we're having to put on developers to know and be aware of, and to configure and do all that stuff. Want to rank in Google? Well, you're going to need to deal with a website in a mobile first kind of way. And again, that is another pressure that we're having to put on developers. And want to be legal? Well, then you have to put in all sorts of things to be GDPR compliant. So over time, we are increasing the barrier of entry to web development, and also deployment. So when deploying a website, I remember the days when deploying a website was simply dragging folders from one folder and pasting them to another folder somewhere else on the server using FTP. And I know I've said FTP is not a good thing, but that was as simple. That was a very simple process. Now we have pipelines. Now we are talking about something completely different. It is pipelines, and that is more pressure. You are now saying that in order to learn deployment, in order to deploy your website, you need to learn DevOps. Ugh. So we are increasingly making web development more complicated, and I don't want to sound like this is a bad thing. because it isn't, because we have to do these things. We have to make these things secure. We have to use SSL. We have to deploy through all of the, we have to deploy all of our dependencies. We have to test all of our code. Sure, I get that. But really, when we just want to build a single simple website with just a couple of pages, this is quite a huge undertaking, more so than it was back in the day. And also, JavaScript has changed so much in such a short piece of time, and there is a unfortunate social, how shall I say, a very unfortunate social circumstance, or sort of tribal behavior, if you will, in JavaScript. In certain JavaScript communities, you are either a coder of X or a coder of Y. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of acceptance of both, which is really dumb, which is really, really dumb. So we are impacting the way people start getting into web development. I think there is a lot of issues with of bringing new candidates in. We're turning away a lot of people right from the start, and we seem to be doing this in a very unconscious kind of manner, right? Like, for example, the lack of MySpace, the lack of is it the Neopets or whatever it's called, those kind of tools that allowed us to be creative on the internet. We have changed from being consumers. We've changed from being creators to being consumers. We are consuming the internet instead of creating the internet, and I think that's really sad. And when I say we've gone from creation to consumption, we are consuming the internet through the means of, or through the tools and the building blocks that have been prescribed to us by the people who think know best. So through the Facebooks, through the Googles, through the Twitters, through the YouTubes. This, you go and want to watch a video, the video is going to be on YouTube, right? And that is the sort of the de facto way of watching YouTube. You want to be on a social network, then Facebook, and you have to just accept the way that Facebook looks. You want to create your own personal profile, right? Well, you've got a designated size for your profile image. And your profile image is always going to be on the left-hand side. It's never going to be on the right. You can only have up to, say, 3 links. There you go. That is all that you are allowed. And you can only have one background color and one foreground color. So there's no area of learning there. I mean, I know people, myself included, who learnt hexadecimal codes by choosing backgrounds of their AOL presses or their MySpace pages. So learning hexadecimal codes through that, learning how to create breakpoints in paragraphs using BRs because you wanted to space out your content. Learning CSS because you wanted to show people that you knew how to put things on the right-hand side and the left-hand side. So exploring all of those things, and also debugging HTML and where it gets so nested and horrible. Those kind of disciplines now are lost and only available to those who go, yeah, actually, I want to learn web development to be a web developer. There really isn't that level now of just trying it out and having the tools available to you. I do think that MySpace and AOL Press and Lycos and all the other ISPs that gave you that kind of that level of bandwidth, of space, or those social media profiles like MySpace and the others, they really did introduce people to web development in a very sort of raw yet safe way, because you could choose to be a web developer based on your experiences that you've had through that. At the moment, we are now saying that a web developer needs to be X, Y, and Z, and all of those things are predefined almost by all of these big companies. You know, you have to accept the fact that you have to write command line stuff. You have to accept the fact that you're going to be working with dependencies, and you have to accept the fact that that the framework that you're dealing with is probably going to change in the next 2 years. So, you know, you're constantly under pressure, and this pressure, I think, is well known to the juniors. And I do feel for people who are being web developers in in 2018, because it certainly wasn't as easy as it is or was when I was starting out. The code that I wrote was dreadful back in those days, but at least I had the capacity to do that and explore that. And it was something that really drove me to web development. The fact that I could write code with the tools that were available, and I could see my work instantaneously. I didn't have to debug the command line. I didn't have to worry about dependency versions. I didn't have to worry about how I was going to deploy websites. I was given those tools. Those tools were available to me. As the web grew, those tools started to get more complicated, and therefore the barrier of entry has started to grow. So anyway, let's just check the time. I think I'm gonna have to shoot off, I believe, soon because of my my throat. But I just wanted to leave you with this thought. It's only been 18 years since the 2000s, and the web has changed dramatically in those 18 years. Where do you think it's going to be in 18 years' time? Where do you think the web is going to be? And what new challenges are we going to be facing? We're coming to the point where we have another level of generation that will be web developers, and they will never know the experiences of growing with the web. The web will be just there, and so they will assume that whatever the web is at that point in time is the acceptable web. So what do you think is going to happen, and what do you think is acceptable? Anyway, thank you ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.